Well, I have the great pleasure of introducing our next presenter, Francis Donald. Francis came into our community. I don't know where he was, hiding out in Santa Fe somewhere. But he is wonderful. We love him. He is a brother, such a generous soul. He is responsible, this is how I know him best, for, well, it's not up there now, but the image that you see for our conference title this year. And a stunning, absolutely stunning image. If you go onto the website and you click, there's a little click link, you can actually read the esotericism behind the image, and there is so much in there, so please do that at some point. Francis is an artist, a teacher, a musician, an esoteric teacher of the Ageless Wisdom. He's on the Moria Federation faculty, and he has been so generous to this esoteric community, and he's also provided our very deep meditative images for the full moon meditations for a number of years, and we are that these would just keep going on and on and on because we can just keep using them over and over and over. So this is the first time that Francis is speaking for us in a plenary, and please warmly welcome Francis Donald.
Thank you. Testing. Thank you, Helena. A warm introduction. I spotted a fur coat floating in the river. I was cold, so I jumped in to get it. That coat was a live bear. It decided to wear me home. I think for many of us, this Rumi poem aptly describes the effect that the ancient wisdom teachings have had on our lives. You know, when we initially waded into that spiritual thought, that river of spiritual thought, we never dreamed that there was something in there that would wear us home, you know, would change our perspective, our understanding on just about everything, really. For example, in the occult school of language, it's said that the vowels and consonants and even the pitches in words in Sanskrit actually carry the potency of that which they represent. The word hridaya, for instance, is translated into English as the heart, but there really is no translation for this word in English because it actually means the etheric heart center itself. And when it's properly enunciated with the correct pitch, and it's usually when it's said, there's also a hand gesture over the proper area of that actual center. It is said to stimulate the heart center of all those around. So this is language taken to a whole other level that most people are not aware of. Or in an entirely different arena, in the science of architecture, we're told that the designer of a room like the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid was actually able to construct, through a profound knowledge of materials and proportion, but all through an intuitive awareness of the vibration of this construction, a space, an environment that could actually facilitate initiation. So what do these two disciplines have in common? Here's this room, actually here. So what do these two disciplines have in common? The fact that when a form, whether a word or a room, is intuitively conceived, or more accurately, intuitively perceived, its informing energy is then able to anchor its influence in the three worlds of human expression, right? But you know, even once we accept the idea that it's possible for a more causal energy to express itself through an outer form, how do we access that causal energy, you know, from this end? How do you penetrate something like this, you know? How do you get to that causal energy? Well, engaging the analytical mind can help. You know, you can, through esoteric scholarship, we can explore the various schools of thought on, you know, triangles, for instance. We can explore them mathematically and occultly. And yet somehow, in spite of the knowledge we've gained, we're still likely to find ourselves standing on the outside of, triangleness, right? Of that essential mystery that manifests as a triangle. We've learned a great deal about the door itself, but it still remains locked. So, how do we open the door? How do we pass through these metaphoric portals? Well, the Tibetan tells us that one way is through the creative imagination. But wait a minute. What does being creative have to do with penetrating a metaphoric mystery? Well, it turns out that this is a pivotal question. To find the answer, we need to understand what's happening energetically during the creative act. In the language of gesture, creativity is not so much, I need you, Lawson, this, as it is, like the Buddha shows us, as it is like this. Receptivity, manifestation. In other words, to become creative is to become a link between the receptive, that which is being received, and the world, right? In the Tarot, the magician shows it this way, right? This is a more Western version, right? Because all holiness is up there, right? Well, in the East, they understand it to be in here. But it's the same thing, right? Receptivity, manifestation. I touch the earth, right? Now, when we understand creativity in this light, we see that in order to open a metaphoric door, we must attune ourselves to that which the door conceals. Then the metaphor, and by metaphor I mean any form that's capable, through the fact that it was well designed, any form capable of anchoring spirit, right? Then the metaphor will always reveal its secrets. But until that attunement takes place, it will just seem impenetrable in some level. The Tibetan tells us that only synchronous vibration to that which lies on the other side of the door produces its opening. Let's take a closer look at this idea. When we begin this linking process, which initiates the building of the Antakarana, it is, of course, tentative and intermittent, but that's okay because once we gain access to an informing source, no matter how tenuous, even if just a gossamer thread, we will have created a path where the unique quality of that informing source will draw us back again and again. Our ray makeup determines the particular way that this linking process unfolds, right? Three tools that are often employed to build the Antakarana are intent, discrimination, and imagination. I'd venture to say that most of us grew up believing that imagination, we considered imagination as a way of making stuff up, right? That's the idea. Oh, you imagined that, we're told. But the wisdom teachings tell us that what we're really doing when we imagine is attuning ourselves to the existing vibration of whatever we're turning our attention to. The attention is, of course, how we manifest our intent. The third aspect, discrimination, allows us to evaluate and even savor, because discrimination is actually a function of the sense of taste. Even savor the pairs of opposites and all the subtle intricacies that they bring into our awareness, right? So together, these three senses or qualities allow us to upwardly adjust that which we are attuning ourselves to. So we have intent, which is the first aspect, imagination, sixth ray because it's on the astral plane, representing the second aspect, and discrimination, fifth ray-ish, third aspect, can become our working tools for unveiling the mysteries, for moving through a metaphoric portal, like this one. Now this symbol might actually, we're using the symbol to show us how to penetrate a symbol here, right? This symbol might actually help us gain some insight into how intent and the imaginative discrimination can penetrate a metaphoric form. Intent, represented by the top point of the triangle, gives us a kind of knowing. It's usually amorphous at first, but that doesn't mean it's weak. Nonetheless, it plants the seeds of what eventually becomes identification, right? I think Michael was talking about yesterday, the seeker and the sought finally become one. That's the sixth ray process, right? But so this is manifest in terms of intent. Now, imagination, represented by the lower right point, the blue point there, magnetically draws our awareness towards our intent, towards the goal that we imagine in our intent. And at the same time, we vibrationally rise to the level of that which we seek. Discrimination, represented by the lower left point, acts as a kind of gauge as to the rightness of our perception, and thus allows us to move from one imagined form to the next always being a little closer to what our intent knows to be more true. At some point, the use of these three qualities begins to forge a link with that which lies on the other side of the portal, which I've represented, because we're on this side, as just a void, right? An indigo blue void, but nonetheless, we can't see beyond the portal. Then we find that cultivating non-attachment to our imagined forms allows us to more quickly release each successive form as we move onward. At that point, we reattune ourselves to that which is more closely mirrors what our intent knows to be true, right? As Browning wrote, wonderful quote, truth successively takes shape, one grade above its last presentment. Of course, this happens in consciousness, it happens in our meditations, but it also happens in our visualizations. However, it sounds fun so far, right? I mean, what a blast. It's like, oh yeah, get me on the spiritual path. This is way cool fun. Unfortunately, this doesn't come without a price. And the hook is this, that at some point, in order to imagine attune to what our intent is urging us towards, we have to shed that which is keeping us from this higher imagining, right? That's where the rub comes in. In fact, basically what's happening is we're being rubbed, scrubbed, as we continually evolve that which we imagine the product of our intent. Okay, as we move closer to this portal, we start to realize that what we thought was our intent is in fact the intent of that which we have been seeking. This is some call this point the midway point. The shift in gravity at that point changes everything. Chagall describes this point. That which lies beyond this portal may be unseen to us. This is what lies beyond the portal. Clearly, it's unseen to him, right? But, as is shown in this Chagall piece, it knows our approach, right? This is when the coat floating in the river becomes the bear. And we realize that, hey, we saw this beautiful form, we were cold, we moved towards it, our spiritual longing. Suddenly, we realize that there is this great consciousness that is now drawing us to it. That's discipleship. It moves us across that point. The Tibetan tells us the creative imagination enables us at the very beginning to act as if we were capable of thus creating. By the way, creating here could be becoming, right? at the very beginning to act as if we were thus capable of becoming. The two terms become interchangeable. Then we gradually become consciously aware of that which we have sought to create or become. Well, that which we have sought to create is what has been working through our intent. But what a promise, huh? All we have to do is act as if we know, right? And eventually, that quality will draw us towards actual knowing. To me, this is the theosophical version of John 3:16, right? In John 3:16, you make a contract, a Christian contract with, all you have to do is believe. Here, all you have to do is act as if, and you're drawn towards the source. Now, here's another facet of this process. The manifestation part of the link, right, this part, when selflessly employed, empowers the receptive part of the link. If we think of this in terms of electricity, it makes perfect sense because both ends of the circuit have to be attached, have to be plugged in before you get the flow. This is why service, which is just another way of describing this part, right? This part is not something, well, it works as a means of grounding the spiritual energy. Remember, the Tibetan tells us service is an effect of soul contact. It's not a quality or a performance. It's not something we do. It's this. It's the grounding of all this consciousness in service on the earth. So, the three aspects of divinity manifesting as intent and discrimination and imagination allow us to effectively visualize. The Tibetan tells us, and heads up for this because it's quite concentrated, visualization is concerned with a pictorial and symbolic sensitivity, which expresses interpretively the spiritual understanding, conveyed by the awakening intuition, the agent of the spiritual triad. Do you see the line of descent here? We have the spiritual triad through its agent, the intuition, impressing our sensitivity using pictures and symbols, thus conveying spiritual understanding. An interesting thing happens as we continue developing our sensitivity to impression. Through our attraction to the understanding it promotes, gradually we find that we shift from a knowledge-based awareness of our reality to a wisdom-based reality. And as a result, the intuition eventually supersedes our analytical thinking, not as a power, but as a priority. They say, that the slayer slays the, how's it go? Okay, it slays, the mind slays the will, but then there's the slayer of the slayer, right? But it's not quite accurate. It's a priority issue, really. You don't just suddenly get dumb. You bring as much as you've ever had, but it's in service to the intuition. Okay. We're told that the imagination is wielded by the disciple in order to bring into some symbolic form that of which he becomes aware through the medium of a line of energy, the antakarana, which he is steadily creating. That of which he becomes aware is the source of the symbolic form. Now, because this symbolic form emanates from the source, we can also use it as a means of regaining contact with that source. So, here's the source vibrating at a frequency beyond our direct perception, right? Here's our symbolic form, which, if well chosen, can be brought into a resonant frequency by the source, thus allowing us to have an experience of the informing source through the metaphor. Is that clear? Do you get how that works? If we have a bell, for instance, and wish to hear its sound but can't strike it directly, it can still be activated by setting up a sympathetic tone. Correct me if I'm wrong, Harold. Which will compel that bell to sound forth, right? Because what's really going on is the vibration, not the bell. Yeah. So if you can create a resonant frequency, you can gain access to the source. This, of course, is the invocative process, and it's also the receptive part of the creative process. Okay, now let's look at some pictorial imagery, which is really just an elaboration of one or more symbols. The fact that we can use a sacred metaphor to regain our connection with the source is the reason, in a nutshell, that I do spiritual artwork. If it wasn't for that, there would be no purpose to it. Since this is a Sex-Ray conference, let's take a look at this Cancerian piece entitled Temple of Light. How many Cancer natives do we have here? Cancer sun signs, just sun, okay? And how about Cancer rising? Wow, more rising than sun, that's incredible. Now how about double Cancers? Do we have any double Cancers? No, how about that? How about only Vesta in Cancer? Oh well. The electric blue that I chose to use and the hints of rose at the center of the temple naturally invoke six-ray energy, which is appropriate to Cancer since it is predominantly ruled by Neptune. I often start an image with an emphasis on color, thus inviting those causal energies that work through color to take effect as soon as possible in the image as a guiding force. I project my intent, remember the three qualities, I project my intent, in this case that the piece reveals something about the Cancerian keywords, I build a lighted house and therein dwell. Then using my discriminative imagination, I let the energies of the colors suggest a symbolic form. As each successive visual metaphor takes form, a truer purpose of the image, which is almost always hidden from me in the early stages, evolves, usually progressing in quite unforeseen ways. Of course, this same process is effective in meditative visualization. Remember the Tibetan's line, visualization is concerned with a pictorial and symbolic sensitivity? That's the key word, by the way. Well, this sensitivity is not only beneficial in meditation, it can also be used when contemplating esoteric imagery. So whether you see something in your imagination or spiritual artwork in a museum or this work, they all offer the same opportunity. The biggest hurdle when looking at anything that's outside your imagination is to break the habit of passive viewing. When viewing an image like this one, for instance, try thinking of it as a work in progress. Like I've come to you with this image and go and say, now what do I do? Right? How can I bring these metaphoric forms into a closer expression of the underlying or informing source? You know, when we are asked for advice, we usually snap into an active role, right? We align our intent, engage our discriminative imagination. You know, there's nothing definitive in this or any image unless it was painted by a master. Any visual image might be further developed. So by imagining yourself as a co-creator, you can more effectively engage your pictorial and symbolic sensitivity, which will in turn allow you to penetrate the facade of the symbology and thus experience the source that substands all these visual metaphors. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? To get through the metaphoric doorways and have an experience of the informing source. Okay, with this idea, gaining an experience of the informing source as our goal, let's take a moment to explore the visual metaphors of this piece. The theme is the lighted house. But the house itself, the house referred to is itself a metaphor for the consciousness of the Cancerian disciple, right? Well, this gives us this terrific device because being able to use the temple to describe the consciousness of the disciple hugely expands our metaphoric toolbox. So in seeing this piece, realize that the temple is that disciple, right? It is a direct manifestation. I build a lighted house and therein dwell, okay? For instance, by marking the 12 portals with the esoteric rulers of the signs, we can infer that the last many rounds of this disciple's incarnations were strongly influenced by the second aspect, by the soul, right? An influence that has transformed the dense opacity. I mean, this is a kind of a Stonehenge-looking place, right? Which we tend to think of as densely opaque. It's stone. So that's what's different here, right? It's transformed that dense opacity, which thus suggests a response to soul purity. And through the ancient use of stonework, we get the sense of the eons that it takes to, for this unfolding process to take place, right? Let's look at the threefold figure. Here I've combined the inward journey, by which the seeker moves from the periphery to the center, right? These are always the two metaphors of movement. Michael, every meditation, he says you can imagine the cone or you can imagine going from the periphery to the center, because whatever, it seems to be a fundamental shift in the two ways we can see it. So what I did here by choosing a particular perspective was combine those two perspectives. So from the perspective of the inward journey, we see this outer figure, which is the light blue figure. We see the light blue figure standing on the steps of the temple, looking towards its center. But from the point of view of the upward journey, the same figure is at the beginning of the path that traverses the Cancer-Capricorn axis, which runs across this part of the temple. And that describes the human stage of becoming, right? Then leads through the far portal, represented by this, into the fifth kingdom beyond, and eventually climbs to the mountain, to the hidden mountaintops, which are here. This represents the hierarchy, and here, this represents Shambhala. Of course, both hidden because we're at the beginning of the path. This represents this side. That doesn't get revealed till you step through this portal into the fifth kingdom. All right, the soul aspect of this figure, represented by this electric darker blue, also stands at the central point of the temple itself. He's the source of light in the temple. The monadic aspect, see this little tiny figure right there in the center, is emanating from the heart of the heart, right? In terms of this inward paradigm. But notice that it's also standing in the fifth kingdom itself on a hillside. At the bottom point of this three-pointed triangle, right? Thus manifesting the great first and second aspects of reality. Okay, now I'd like to do, we've done a little exploration with what can be done with pictorial imagery. Let's take a look at symbols. Symbols can be somewhat elaborate, like this one, which accentuates the concept of the inner path, right? This one's all about the inner path. You've got this portal. Or this one, which illustrates one aspect of the 12 in 1. I think one of the names of the 6-ray logos, or Lord, great little Lord, I imagine their logoid, is the manifesting of the 12. Well, can't go there, no time. Oops. Or becoming much simpler, we have this, which I call epsilon because it resembles a small e. Interestingly, simpler symbols are often the more profound. In fact, DK tells us that as we progress on the path, the geometry that defines our consciousness becomes simpler and simpler, right? Okay, I started painting spiritual images, the first wave, way back in the 80s. A few years ago, I was rooting around down in my basement looking for a hammer or something, and I came across one of these old paintings, and I was struck by a symbol that I had used 20 years earlier to adorn the headdress of a figure in that piece, a figure that at the time was meant to represent the soul. But I had just begun my, my ancient wisdom instruction, and I was working mostly mystically at that time. This symbol shown here stuck with me, so I began superimposing it over various geometrical symbols. When I superimposed it over the 5-pointed star, I realized I'd found the source of the symbol. I only had to adjust my original freehand symbol a degree or two for it to fit as it does here. Okay, a symbol based on a more archetypal symbol, like this one is, emphasizes certain aspects of the underlying geometry and de-emphasizes other aspects, right? This symbol seems to draw our attention to the separation between the lower and upper parts of the star, which doesn't really exist in the original. I mean, that sense of separation doesn't exist so much in the 5-pointed star. Now, interestingly, the Tibetan tells us that the 5-pointed star represents the synthesis of the lower moving into the abstract or higher. So, starting to get a bit of a philosophical basis for this symbol's emphasis. Okay, another way that can help us find the particular meaning of a symbol that is based on a more archetypal symbol is to look for any totally original features not found in the underlying geometry. There's actually only one feature in this symbol that's totally original. All the other lines are based on the star, right? This one and this one are actually tracing the line of the star. This one just connects the baseline, and this is built on this point, right? But we do have this one feature right there that's an original feature of this symbol. So we look to that to find its unique meaning. As I continued to overlay geometrical forms on this symbol, I discovered that this inner point right there and the 3 outer points, here, here, and here, can be connected by means of a golden spiral, which is based on the Fibonacci sequence. Well, this brings in a whole new philosophical possibilities, right? Nature uses a spiral in its growth pattern. It can be found in everything from sunflowers to seashells. So this counterclockwise motion outward could be seen as representing the unfoldment of nature. But this symbol seems to draw us in rather than out. So in this case, perhaps the golden spiral is meant to show us nature's path of return from the quaternary, 1, 2, 3, 4, into the 5th principle, that inner core of nature. Well, as human beings, what is that core? Depending on where you are on the path, it's either the soul or the monad, yeah? So if this point represents the heart of nature, this opening here might represent a kind of outer door leading into an outer or antechamber area. And this inner door then would lead to an inner quality, you know. And if you look at this, you'll see that indeed that's the case, that the inner area is the heart of the star, right? Interestingly, that the downturned pentagram, to me, has always represented the divine sacrificing itself in form. And then, of course, you have the aspirational quality of the upward pointing. And it's the combination of that. This is the little door that leads to that quality. Anyway, you really get into this stuff, man. This is So a couple of years ago, when I began working on an image called the burning ground, which you see here, this symbol again came to mind, and I decided to use it as the shape of the burning ground. You can see it here. Here's the baseline, and it goes up to the point and comes in, and here's the little opening with the disciples standing at the entrance to the burning ground. See, all you do is just lay this down flat, and you'll see it there. As soon as I chose this symbol, the image seemed to paint itself. And then you know that you're on to something, right? In fact, I think that the symbol drew to itself that which would best express its meaning. Oh man, these are the high moments. In other words, the informing energy that expresses itself through the line and shape of this symbol, right, further manifested through the visual metaphors that make up this piece. So, the fact that it was prominent in the headdress of a figure that was meant to represent my soul, the way it revealed itself in this image, and the symbol's underlying geometry all give us at least some idea of its possible meaning. You know, we can never know for sure until you actually cross, I would say, third initiation or beyond. There is no surety of meaning. It's an open audience center that would start to reveal the greater levels of truth. But that doesn't mean we can't work with these and access from this side their informing energies. Okay, skip. If you'll give me 20 more minutes, no. Okay. There's a sequence of 2 Tarot arcana, speaking of symbolic pictorial metaphors, skip, that personify the questing spirit of the creative imagination. Any idea about what those 2 major Tarot arcana might be? Any ideas? That it personify the questing spirit. Yes, the Fool. And the one that follows, the Magician, right? Well, these 2 Tarot arcana form a kind of Castor-Pollux pair, which defines an aspirant to soul relationship that I've depicted in a lot of my works. You can see it in this Geminian piece entitled Mudra, which emphasizes both separation and relationship. Because Gemini rules the etheric subplanes, the soul's hand gesture, do you remember me coming to you asking you about a hand gesture? Yeah, this particular one is prana, which actually is a healing gesture for others and for yourself. And since Gemini rules the etheric planes, it's particularly appropriate. Interestingly, it also just shows the 2, right? It's the Geminian nature. It's often that kind of thing happens. All right, we see a different emphasis in this Libran image called the razor's edge, which describes the balance gained when the soul overshadows the personality, or because Libra is a cardinal sign, we could also see this as the monad overshadowing the soul. This piece was inspired by my all-time favorite sculpture, which depicts the pharaoh Khafre. For me, the dominant position of the hawk suggests a very high level of evolution. And I've never seen it more economically and yet powerfully described as this particular sculpture. Okay, to complete the air sign trilogy, in my own work, I'll do it anyway. Do you see the difference between this level of consciousness and this? You see, here we're at seeking level, right? It's the aspirant, maybe even becoming the disciple, but its eyes are not yet, he hasn't reached that midway point to where suddenly the source reveals itself. But boy, that's not the case here, is it? you know. Okay. So to complete this trilogy of air signs is this piece called From the Heart of the Master, which illustrates a group's relationship to its master. Notice all these have as their, if you're going to choose one symbol, it'd be the circle with a point in the center, right? Think of the Cancerian piece. Even in yourself, the soul stands at the center of your outer form, right? You're seeking the soul, it's to that point in the center. It's the soul seeking the monad, that point in the center. Om Mani Padme Hum, the heart of the heart, right? And it continues at this point. This is actually a sweep of a circle that completely surrounds this master figure. Okay, recently I've been exploring the soul-personality connection in more abstract terms. This piece is, of course, familiar to you now. For instance, this piece, entitled Antakarana, focuses on the connection between soul and personality more than the personality, which is completely described by the waters, right? That's the level of the personality. The column of filigreed light, it doesn't show as much on a projected screen, but this great detail in the filigree of this light indicates the intricate complexities of the causal body, but nonetheless integrated, leading to the realm of the soul, right, which opens to even higher realities. Helena commented when I first sent her this image that this visual metaphor looks like a chalice, which I really like because that emphasizes the receptive quality, you know, needed in order to come into this state of consciousness. In fact, the chalice is a perfect six-ray symbol for being receptive to the higher realms, right? Wow. 26 seconds left. How cool is that? Oh, no, I'm not done. Yikes. Okay. During the workshop I'll be presenting, which is called Working with Color and Symbol, we'll be exploring 3 colors in, I dare say, great depth. Through a series of visualizations, we'll discover how indigo blue, blue violet, and emerald green affect our physical, emotional, and mental bodies, as well as exploring the symbols, the ideas, and even the musical tones that are naturally associated with these colors. But a warning, during most of the workshop, we'll be involved in guided meditations that will require a lot of concentrated visualization on your part. So, you know, if you feel like kicking back for that hour, this is not the place to be. But if you choose to make the effort, it's actually quite possible that you'll have an experience of the informing energy that works through color. I hope to see you there. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.